didn't realize the moment my boss ruined my career. I wish I could tell you it happened with a slammed door or a threat or some dramatic warning, but it didn't. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon over lukewarm coffee in a quiet office where I thought I was among people I could trust. If you've ever felt the exact second someone took advantage of your loyalty, you know what it does to your stomach. It doesn't hit like a punch. It spreads. Cold, slow, humiliating. And what still scares me is how normal everything looked while it was happening. Like betrayal can wear an ordinary suit and talk to you like an old friend. My name is Michael. I've been a financial director for nearly a decade, and I thought I understood how business works. But the truth is, you never really know how fragile your position is until the person who built you up decides to take everything back. It started months earlier when my boss, Simon, brought in his new prodigy, a guy named Adam who walked around like the company already belonged to him. He had the haircut, the shoes, the smile that looked rehearsed in front of a mirror. Everyone else could see Simon's newfound obsession with him. I told myself it didn't matter. I'd been with the company 7 years, rode through down quarters, helped negotiate 2 acquisitions, and restructured our debt when the market bottomed out. I didn't feel threatened. I didn't feel jealous. At least that's what I said anytime someone hinted at how Simon suddenly couldn't stop praising Adam. The real shift began quietly. Fewer meetings with Simon, more looping in Adam on things I'd always handled alone. Strange comments from other departments like, "So Adam's leading that now?" Followed by a confused glance when I said no. I kept brushing it off because that's what you do when you trust someone. You don't assume the worst. You assume context, miscommunication, temporary changes. You assume loyalty still means something. Then came that Tuesday. Simon called me into his office, the same one where he once told me he saw me as the future of the company. He closed the door gently, not dramatically, and thanked me for how I'd carried the financial load the past year. He sounded sincere, almost fatherly. Then he handed me a thin folder and said it was a simple compliance update for asset restructuring. Nothing unusual. Paperwork was my entire job. I flipped through it. Legal jargon about risk mitigation, liability buffers, protection against market volatility. Nothing jumped out as dangerous. Then he added almost casually, "I had Adam review it too. He agrees it's the right move." If I'd been paying attention, that was the moment I should have paused. It wasn't the words. It was the tone. Light. Too light. The kind someone uses when they hope you won't look too closely. But I signed. I signed because I trusted him. Because 7 years of loyalty feels heavier than one unfamiliar sentence. Because the betrayal hadn't sharpened its teeth yet. I initialed every page. Simon thanked me, clapped my shoulder, and said, "Smart move, Michael. This keeps everything protected." I walked out, feeling like I'd done my job. 2 days later, small things began to feel off. A vendor emailed me, congratulating me on stepping back from asset oversight. A banking contact replied to a message with, "Should I loop in Adam now that the transition's official?" Transition? Oversight? I froze. I hadn't stepped back from anything. I hadn't transitioned a thing. That was the first moment my chest tightened. I went back to the folder. Same jargon. Same harmless words. But now, reading with suspicion instead of trust, certain phrases twisted into new shapes. Terms like delegated authority, conditional transfer, attached beneficiary rights, pieces that meant nothing alone but everything together. And then the part that made my stomach drop. The designated beneficiary on several of the transferred controls was Adam. Not the company, Adam. I reread it 10 times. Somehow, in my own handwriting, I had signed over portions of our asset control. Not ownership, but authority. Enough authority to let someone make decisions I should have been responsible for. Enough to shift power. Enough to leave me carrying the liability if anything went wrong. I sat alone in my office, blinds half closed, wondering if I'd misunderstood, wondering if I'd missed something obvious, wondering if I'd betrayed myself by not reading every line like a lawyer instead of an employee who trusted the man sitting across from him. I wanted to believe it was a mistake. I really did. But then, late that evening, I overheard a conversation in the hallway outside the elevator. Simon's voice, Adam's laughter, and a sentence that lodged in my spine like ice. He won't notice until it's too late. That was when the truth stopped being foggy, when the knot in my stomach stopped feeling like stress and started feeling like warning, when every skipped meeting, every sudden change, every decreasing responsibility formed a single picture. I wasn't being sidelined. I was being replaced. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that I had helped them do it. And I didn't know it yet. But the papers I'd signed weren't the end of anything. They were the beginning. The first real hit came a week later, on a morning so normal it almost felt insulting. I was reviewing quarterly projections when IT flagged an access request I supposedly approved. It authorized Adam to manage a subset of assets I'd always overseen alone. The request carried my digital signature, except I had never seen it before, never approved it, never touched it. I stared at the timestamp, every vein in my hands tightening. 2:14 p.m., the exact time I'd been in a meeting across the building. I checked the logs again. Same result. My credentials, my authority, not my actions. I called IT, trying to keep my voice steady. They double-checked. It was routed through your account, Michael. Everything in the system says you approve this. No concern. No suspicion. Just technical certainty, the kind that doesn't care about reality. When I hung up, something inside me cracked, not loudly, but cleanly. I printed every document I could find. Old drafts, email chains, approval histories, embedded metadata. Slowly, painfully, a pattern emerged. Simon had been shifting my permissions, delegating them away, handing Adam responsibilities I didn't even realize were slipping from my control. One piece at a time. Quietly. Children's blocks rearranged in a different order until the tower wasn't mine anymore. Even worse, the papers I'd signed weren't simply compliance forms. They were legal modifications granting Adam provisional rights over parts of the company's asset portfolio. Rights that appeared temporary on paper but were, in reality, stepping stones for permanent transfer. And I had authorized it. My name. My initials. My trust. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. But the universe doesn't deal in coincidences when betrayal's involved. The next crack came during a meeting with the operations team. A senior manager asked Adam, not me, whether a specific fund was being reallocated. And Adam, smug, confident, rehearsed, answered, correctly, with details he shouldn't have known. Details only I had access to before signing those papers. I didn't even look at him. I stared at Simon, who sat back with a faint smile, the kind you wear when you think you've outplayed everyone in the room. He didn't acknowledge me, didn't glance my way, didn't even pretend. The room carried on like nothing was wrong. But something was wrong. So wrong the air felt heavy with it. Later that afternoon, I found out Adam had been moved, quietly, into an acting oversight role for our asset division. Not officially, not announced, but listed that way in the internal directory. My name still held the title, but his held the function. It was the professional equivalent of waking up to find someone else living in your house, wearing your clothes, using your keys. I went to Simon's office. I didn't knock. I closed the door behind me. What exactly is going on? My voice was calm. Too calm. He looked up as if I'd interrupted a pleasant thought. Michael, relax. This is just restructuring. You transferred half my responsibilities without telling me. Not transferred. He gestured vaguely. Distributed. It's what happens as companies grow. And the documents I signed, the ones tied to Adam's new access? He leaned back, fingertips pressed together. You approved them. You told me they were compliance updates. They were. The corner of his mouth twitched upward. Compliance includes adapting to new leadership structures. There it was, a quiet confession disguised as corporate logic. I stared at him, searching for any sign of the man who once called me indispensable. There was nothing, just calculation. Cold, patient calculation. "You used me," I said, not loudly, not dramatically, just truthfully. He didn't deny it. "You'll be fine," he said. "You're talented. You'll always have a place here. But Adam, he's the next generation. The board loves him. Investors love him. You should want the company to have the strongest image possible. The strongest image, not the strongest leadership, not the strongest ethics, just the right poster boy." I walked out feeling like I'd swallowed broken glass. That night, I stayed in the office until the cleaning staff started vacuuming. I dug through systems, logs, approvals, everything I could legally access. And the deeper I went, the clearer it became. The plan wasn't just to phase me out. The plan was to shift liability onto me, to make me the one responsible for decisions Adam executed, using authority that originated from documents I signed. If anything blew up, legally, financially, operationally, I'd be the fall guy. My hands were cold. My whole body felt hollow. But underneath the fear, something else started to grow. Something sharp, something precise. I forwarded copies of everything I found to a private email account I rarely used, printed hard copies, documented inconsistencies, captured timestamps, flags, discrepancies in user access patterns. It was the beginning of my counterattack, though I didn't know it yet. I just knew I couldn't let this slide into the kind of disaster I'd spend years digging myself out of. The next morning, the company atmosphere changed. People spoke to Adam like he was already a director. They spoke to me like I was already history. It wasn't overt, never is, but the air around betrayal has a specific temperature. You feel it when you walk through it. A slight chill, a tightening in conversations, a "how you holding up?" spoken too quickly, like someone asking a question with the answer already known. By midweek, I received a calendar invite, board review, mandatory attendance, sent by Simon, not by me, not by the CFO, not by the board chair. The agenda was attached. One line caught my attention: transition of asset oversight responsibilities. Transition, not discussion, not evaluation. Transition. My name wasn't listed anywhere else in the document, but Adam's was. My throat went dry. My hands went numb. And that's when I realized. They intended to make this official. They intended to push me out on paper. They intended to erase me. I closed my office door, sat down, and stared at the wall until my focus returned. Slowly, steadily, like a lens adjusting. If they were going to remove me, they were going to do it in front of the board. And if they were going to do it publicly, I'd show the board exactly what Simon had done privately. I didn't know yet, but that decision would cost them everything. I didn't sleep the night before the board meeting, not out of fear, not anymore, but because my mind finally clicked into a clarity I didn't know I was capable of. Betrayal sharpens you. It burns away every illusion you've been feeding yourself and leaves you with something clean, focused, and cold. By morning, my plan was carved in stone. I shaved, put on the same suit I wore the day we closed our biggest acquisition, and drove to the office early. The building was quiet, lights still off on most floors. Good. I didn't want an audience yet. I printed the final copies of my evidence, access logs, metadata, internal messages with timestamps, document trail comparisons, side-by-side overlays of altered approval strings, and the list of assets tied to the fraudulent transition Simon orchestrated. I laid everything in a folder. No theatrics, no grand villain speech, just facts that cut deeper than emotion ever could. By the time the board filed into the conference room, I felt oddly calm, like the eye of a storm I'd learned how to stand in. The long table filled quickly. Chairwoman Patel, 2 senior investors, legal counsel, operations chief, and a few others who usually sat through these meetings without saying a word. Simon arrived last, full of confidence, gripping a binder thick with prepared statements. Adam followed him, chest out, smile eager, projecting the energy of a man who thinks he's about to be crowned. I took my seat at the far end, right where Simon expected me, quiet, out of the spotlight, already fading out of relevance. He miscalculated. The meeting began with polite greetings. Water glasses clinked, papers shuffled. Simon cleared his throat, ready to sell his masterpiece. Thank you all for joining. Today's review concerns a necessary shift in leadership structure within the Financial Oversight Division. As you know, adapting to market volatility requires us to place the right people in the right roles. He was rehearsed, fluent, confident. He clicked a remote, revealing a slide deck titled Transition Plan. My name wasn't on the front page. Adam's was. He talked about future-proofing the company, new blood, efficient realignment, the kind of corporate poetry people use when they're trying to bury someone without leaving fingerprints. I let him talk. When he finished the introduction, he smiled at the board as if expecting applause. Chairwoman Patel nodded politely. Thank you, Simon. Before we proceed, I'd like to hear from Michael. A few heads turned. Simon stiffened, but his smile didn't drop. Of course, he said. Michael, feel free to share your thoughts. I'm sure you support the transition. I stood, adjusted my jacket, and walked toward the opposite end of the table. No paper shuffle, no theatrics. I don't support the transition, I said, because it wasn't a transition. It was a setup. A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. Simon's eyes narrowed, just a flicker, but enough to confirm I'd struck the first nerve. I placed my folder on the table and opened it, slowly, deliberately. Over the last 2 months, someone has been using my credentials to authorize asset access I never approved. Someone has manipulated internal signatures. Someone has orchestrated transfers tied to documents I was misled into signing. I handed the first packet to legal. Page 3 shows the metadata. My signature was applied from a terminal I wasn't logged into. Page 7 highlights the discrepancies in the versioning logs. Page 10 outlines how those approvals directly benefited one employee. I looked at Adam. His smile faltered. The board members leaned forward. Legal began flipping through pages, eyes widening the further they read. Simon tried to keep his voice steady. Michael, let's not turn this into a conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy if the data is clean, I interrupted. My voice wasn't loud. It was steady. Check the timestamps, the system logs, the mirrored drafts. Every alteration links back to your directives, Simon. He opened his mouth. No words came out. I wasn't finished. I trusted you. I believed the paperwork was compliance-related, but the restructuring was a disguised transfer of authority, one that positioned Adam to take over my role while leaving me legally responsible for every decision he made. Silence, heavy, suffocating silence. I slid the final document across the table, the transcript, a printed copy of the hallway recording, the one where Simon said, "He won't notice until it's too late." A sound escaped Adam, half gasp, half curse. Simon went pale. Chairwoman Patel's face drained of warmth. "Simon," she said, barely above a whisper, "is this authentic?" "It's taken out of context," he stammered. "It's time-stamped," I replied, and corroborated by the system logs, the altered approvals, and the fact that Adam was granted authority I never relinquished. Adam finally broke. "I didn't know about the metadata stuff. Simon told me you were stepping back." "Adam," Patel cut him off sharply, "stop talking." He closed his mouth like he'd been slapped. The board reviewed every page in stunned quiet, the kind of quiet that means something has already died in the room, even if no one's acknowledged the body yet. When Patel finally looked up, her voice was steady steel. "Simon, you deliberately misled an executive into signing documents that compromised company oversight. You manipulated internal systems. You exposed us to extreme liability. This is grounds for immediate suspension pending formal removal. Simon froze. Completely. No emotion, no defense. Just a man realizing the ground had opened beneath his feet. And as for Adam, Patel turned toward him. Your involvement, whether passive or active, disqualifies you from any elevated role. Effective immediately, your access is revoked. Adam looked like someone had unplugged him from the wall. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I didn't even blink. Patel turned to me. Michael, you're the only person here who acted with any integrity. The board will need interim leadership to stabilize operations. She paused. We'd like you to assume acting oversight of the entire financial division. I nodded once. I'll do what's necessary. And for the first time in weeks, breathing didn't feel like dragging air through broken glass. But that wasn't the end. As we adjourned, Patel asked me to stay behind. One of the investors approached. What you uncovered prevented a disaster, he said quietly. If this had gone on any longer, the legal exposure alone... He stopped, shook his head. You saved us. I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt done. Leaving the room, I passed Simon. He didn't look at me, not once. His eyes stared ahead like he was watching his entire future collapsing in slow motion. He thought I was gone. I wasn't. When I left the boardroom that day, the hallway felt different. Not brighter, not triumphant, just honest, like the building had finally stopped pretending. Employees passed me with quick glances, reading my expression, reading the silence, sensing something had shifted. Corporate atmospheres are strange that way. They can smell the moment power changes hands. I went straight to my office and closed the door, not to hide, just to breathe without anyone else's expectations pressing against my skull. The chair felt firmer, the desk felt heavier, and for the first time in months, the room didn't feel like it belonged to someone waiting to replace me. Emails hit my inbox fast. Legal confirming Simon's suspension. Security requesting directions about access revocation procedures for Adam. The board chair scheduling a follow-up meeting for the interim stabilization plan. People who had barely spoken to me in weeks suddenly wanted my attention. But I didn't rush to answer. I leaned back, loosened my tie, and let reality settle. Simon was out. Adam was nothing. And I hadn't had to raise my voice once. The quiet felt earned. About an hour later, there was a soft knock at my door. When I opened it, Patel stood there, composed, purposeful. Walk with me, she said. We made a slow loop around the executive floor. She didn't say anything at first, and I appreciated that more than she knew. Finally, she spoke. What you did today wasn't just correcting wrongdoing. It protected the company's future. She gave me a measured look. Not many people would have had the discipline to document everything. Fewer would have had the restraint to present it without emotion. I wasn't restraining anything, I said. There was nothing left to restrain. She smiled faintly. Even more impressive. We stopped by the window overlooking the parking lot. Afternoon light slid across the glass like a long exhale. I want to be direct, she continued. The board voted. Simon will be formally removed as CEO within the week. Effective immediately, we need someone stable, capable, and untainted to step in while we restructure leadership. A pause. We want you. Not interim oversight, not acting director. CEO. I didn't answer right away. Not out of shock. My mind simply needed to catch up to the gravity of the moment. Why me? I finally asked. After all this, why put me in that seat? Because you're the only one who didn't try to take something that wasn't yours, she said. That matters more than talent. There was no pitch, no flattery, just truth spoken plainly. I accepted, not with a handshake or a dramatic nod, just a quiet, steady yes that felt heavier than any contract I'd ever signed. The rest of the day unfolded like a machine resetting. HR contacted me about transition protocols. Legal briefed me on upcoming statements to investors. Security updated me once Adam's badge was disabled. Apparently he tried to argue, tried to negotiate. Even tried to blame Simon. Nothing worked. He left with a cardboard box and a face drained of every advantage he thought he had. Simon was escorted out after being allowed to collect personal items. He didn't look at anyone. Not at me, not at the board, not at the building he'd ruled like a kingdom. His departure wasn't explosive, it was hollow. The kind of ending that comes only when a man realizes he's not the predator he believed. But the warning sign everyone ignored for too long. When I finally finished the day's avalanche of responsibilities, the office was nearly empty. The sun had drifted below the skyline, painting the city in quiet gold. I grabbed my coat, shut off the lights, and stepped into the hallway. No tension, no pressure, just stillness. In the lobby, the night guard nodded at me, unaware anything monumental had happened. Outside, the air was cold enough to steady my nerves. I walked to my car slowly, not in exhaustion, but because, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel chased by the future. At home, I dropped my keys on the table and sat down without turning on the lights. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't accusing. It wasn't waiting for the next blow. It was just silence. Clean. I made myself dinner, something simple, not celebratory, just enough. After eating, I stepped onto the balcony and watched the city breathe. People below me rushed through their lives, headlights weaving in and out like threads in a tapestry they didn't know they were part of. I thought about Simon, not with anger, but with clarity. He had built his downfall one small lie at a time, layering charm and manipulation until the structure collapsed under its own weight, and Adam had chosen the illusion of power instead of the work required to earn it. Their choices led them to the edge. Mine led me away from it. Later, I opened my laptop and wrote an email to the board. Not a speech, not a manifesto. Just a commitment. I'll lead with transparency. Nothing hidden. Nothing borrowed. Nothing built on anyone else's blind spots. When I hit send, something settled in me completely. I wasn't fighting anymore. I wasn't defending. I wasn't waiting. The next morning, I arrived early. Employees nodded at me with a different kind of respect. Not fear, not awe, but recognition. They knew what had happened without needing the details. Businesses have their own whispered language. In my new office, the one that used to be Simon's, I placed a single item on the desk, the folder of evidence, not as a trophy, not as a warning, as a reminder. What nearly destroyed me wasn't ambition. It was misplaced trust. And what saved me wasn't revenge. It was clarity. By noon, the company had stabilized under the announcement of new leadership. Investors responded positively. Staff rallied. The legal exposure Simon created was contained. Everything, absolutely everything, was back under control. In the afternoon, I shredded the folder. Every page, every timestamp, every line of proof. It had done its job. I didn't need it anymore. When the last sheet disappeared into the machine, I leaned back, breathed in slowly, and felt a level of peace I hadn't known in years. Nothing unfinished, nothing unanswered, nothing owed, just a clean ending, and the beginning of something I didn't have to fear.